Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Critic Circle for the second day of our Juneteenth Cinema Celebration. I'm Robin from Black Girls Create. Thank you guys for hanging with us. We had a couple of technical issues, as in my internet dropped out at 4:28. But we're here, ready to get going, ready to talk about these two wonderful films that we screened earlier today. So if you guys want to introduce yourself, Israel, you want to introduce who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Israel Daramola, magazine writer formerly, freelance writer and critic, mostly music and film, occasionally television, and occasionally I make my own stuff too, but mostly I'm just a humble critic, writing about whatever movies they'll let me write about.
Okay, and my name is actually David Jamel. Moses would be the last one, but yeah, I'm a freelance film critic as well. Also an actor. I've been acting for 13 years. I've been writing for maybe about 4 or 5. So yeah, that's basically the bulk of it.
All right. And then
I can hear now. Yay.
Hey, we just went live, so introduce yourself and what you do.
Hey, so I'm Jasmine. I live in Houston, Texas. Just a cinephile. I studied radio, TV, film in college, but I work in advertising now. So just excited to talk about movies.
Sorry.
Someone's on.
That was me, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I don't know what y'all heard, but I'm Jasmine. I live in Texas. I am a very avid movie fan, so I'm excited to talk to other Black movie fans and talk about some critical stuff.
All right. So let's just go into the first movie that we watched today was Miss Juneteenth, that starred Nicole Beharie and Kendrick Perkins, who we all know from Insecure, and Nicole from most famous for Sleepy Hollow, and the debacle that was Sleepy Hollow. Miss Juneteenth was written and directed by Channing Godfrey Peoples. And just, give me some of your thoughts about the film and what we saw and what you took away from it.
Should let the Texas native start off.
Yeah, go ahead.
I actually really enjoyed that it was a movie in Texas that was made by someone from Texas, because a lot of times when people not from Texas make movies, there's like horses and tumbleweeds and stuff in the movie. So this really did feel like an actual honest look at a day in the life of a little Black family in Texas. So I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah, the movie in general, at first I'm just kind of paying attention to where exactly the story might be headed and where it was going, and it was just, I think, nice. I think coming of age movies are so far and few between for us that whenever you see one, it's kind of a warm feeling. I had that same sort of feeling when I first saw The Inkwell, and of course the other movie that's on our ticket. So yeah, it was just nice kind of just to visit other places, but it feels like always to me at least, wherever you go in the States, as long as it has those kinds of recognizable aesthetics or whatever, it's I don't want to like take away from other Black experiences, but just simply saying that a lot of those experiences feel universal, so you still feel home no matter what hood you're in.
I thought it was a really sweet film. I appreciated how specific it was to a very very specific culture and version of Black life and Black working class life, which is, I think, not any more interesting or anything type of story, but definitely a story that kind of gets swept up a little bit more than stories about, Black people who are a little more well off, or Black people who are just steeped in violence all the time. It's just a very working class type of movie that I appreciated that about it. And just kind of just giving this glimpse of what it's like to live in Texas and in small town Texas, and just in these dirt roads in the South. And I'm someone who grew up near a dirt road in the South, so even though I'm not a Texan, obviously I recognize a lot of those people, and the things that happen in that movie is stuff that I experienced when I grew up. So I appreciate the hyper specificity of all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that really struck me was, both of the movies that we screened today were definitely coming of age tales. And I couldn't really think about, coming of age tales starring Black people are so few and far in between anyway. But then this one, especially like starring a young Black girl, and really centering on that relationship between her and her mother. The only movie that came to my mind in that kind of speaking about that was Precious, and that was definitely not it was much more, like you were saying, like built on or centering around trauma and violence, and this was a mom doing her best, and doing what she thinks is best, and a daughter kind of knowing that but also wanting to be your own person. So I was wondering what you guys thought about having I guess the trope of, or the genre of coming of age movies, and then kind of pairing it into being specifically surrounded around Blackness, and then Black women. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I think what was interesting about it is that even though it is coming of age about a teenage girl, it's really told through the eyes of her mother, which is a really refreshing take on it too, because it's not the teenager story from the teenager. And so that's pretty original too. I couldn't really think of anything else that does it quite that way. But then even with the Black experience, it's just at its core about Black women lifting each other up in a society that doesn't necessarily do it for them, which is kind of a fresh take as well.
Well, if we mean like specifically about coming of age in general, there's obviously tons of movies that have captured in different varying degrees, like a specificity, like mother-daughter relationships and mother-child relationships, like Crooklyn or Claudine, or even a recent movie that came out on Amazon Prime, Sella and the Spades, wasn't a mother-daughter movie, but it was a coming-of-age movie about young Black kids in a private school. But like, yes, I think the specificity of like this mother who's got kind of reminiscent, but also trying to almost change what happened in her life by doing it through her daughter's life is it's not typically a story that happens that you see Black versions of, and if you do, it's usually a more male type of movie. So yeah, it was definitely a nice change of air, and it's definitely a good movie about just what your parents go through and how it looks from their vantage point when they're trying to do what they think is best for you and for their children as a parent.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off of that, there's always been, I feel as though, you can definitely see it in plenty of films featuring white people, and then next after that, African American males. But I always pay attention to these stories that have to do with passing on legacies about what the last generation feels about the latest generation, and sort of that idea that it seems like in some way or another there's always this kind of respectability politic from the last generation, and then clashing with this more rebellious idea of who it is or what it is or how full it is we can be from the generation after. And I was definitely kind of paying attention to that with the mother, with everything that she wanted, and especially with the Miss Juneteenth group, which seemed to be a lot of the stuff that they were saying and they were talking about and what they're training these little girls in had to do with the sort of respectability politics as it pertained to women, and even in certain ways that boxed the mother in that. And then having it's a lesson that not only hits in coming of age tales, as Jasmine spoke to. Usually it's about from the little girl's perspective, and so therefore when a lot of times it is from a child's perspective, then it's the child that is coming of age. But I also feel like this was a journey for the mother too, since it was coming from a perspective, and both of them had journeys that they had to go through, which was also refreshing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, David, what you were saying is really true, in that I think in the mother's in the coming of age of the mother also, you know what I mean? Like, she's starting to recognize, like, I have this child, and I've had this kind of thought that if she can be Miss Juneteenth and then not waste those opportunities the way that she felt that she wasted her opportunities, then that's going to set her up. But she has to also figure out and learn who her child is, you know, and the differences that they have, and like the different goals that they might have, and how that doesn't necessarily mean that if she doesn't take this shot, doesn't mean that it's going, you know, things aren't going to go well for her, which is how it kind of felt in the beginning of this movie. Was like all of her hopes and things are pinned on, you know, in the same way that I think a lot of parents are, you know, you go to school, you get good grades, you go to college, you graduate from college, and then you're set, and things will fall into place. And so having that sense of, you know, also, you know, the daughter figuring out who she is and life, and how she, you know, what she wants, but also the mother figuring out there are a lot of ways in which my daughter can be successful, and the best way is if I allow her to be her genuine self and be accepting of it.
Robin, that reminds me of like two really, really cool images that I liked. So there's the one frame where she's kind of sitting, turquoise is sitting outside, she's on the steps, she's wearing the crown, and then she's just dragging a cigarette. And you can tell that that's what's going through her mind. Everything you just said, like, you know, everything that she thought she was supposed to be, everything she was trying to get her daughter to be. So that was kind of the initial, her thinking about it and putting everything together. And then at the actual pageant, after, you know, he doesn't read the daughter's name, it shows her face again, and that reaction, she's just, you can see so much in her face of, oh, that's disappointing, but yes, it will be okay, and I'm okay, and, you know, we will all get through this kind of thing. So I think, like, everything that you just said, Robin, was kind of summed up in those two images of her thinking it out and reacting to it all.
Yeah. There were a few movies that I wrote down that I felt like had pieces. That doesn't have to be that they were exactly like, just more so that they had some aspect of them that matched. And so there's He Got Game, and that's because I felt as though there's that same kind of thing where you have a parent that's really like pressing this kid to take this path that they almost were on themselves and then got derailed. And it's passionate, although it was nice to notice the difference between that and with male energy, where it's like all this violence going on in order to shape your son into this man that he wants to be. And then when it's a woman, and it's a lot more of, I think it's not only hands-on, but it's a softer touch, but at the same time, there's still a lot of pressure on the child to become something that ultimately is that they don't even know or sure that it belongs to them, and they're kind of on their journey to finding it. So that obviously, Israel spoke to Claudine, and that was one that I had on there for obvious reasons. And even Eve's Bayou, with again somewhat of the same ideas of sort of these legacies of parents and their natural fears as it pertains to their children, of these kinds of spiritual and American curses that have been put on African American families for years. That's all.
Yeah, I think those are great references and callbacks, and I can see those. I can see how you got there, so I think that's really cool. Do you guys have any thoughts about the ways in which womanhood was portrayed? I mean, we get to see kind of 3 generations of this family, the shortcomings and the ways in which I guess each parent or each mother kind of disappointed or didn't, or is not quite everything that their child needs. And did anything in that kind of stick out to you in those relationships?
Well, this is a very woman centric point of view throughout the movie, and it definitely has what I really enjoyed, I think, was a really great way of introducing a lot of politics, for lack of a better word, within these different subcultures of Black women traditions in Texas, without trying to make a truly defiant position on any of them, or trying to pass any type of judgment, or like present it as anything other than these are just people and this is just what they do, and it's up to us to interpret it how we interpret it. And I guess the main example of that is probably the Miss Juneteenth pageant traditions themselves, and sort of how they structure these programs for these young ladies, and have them doing etiquette classes, and you have them go to that I'm blanking on what it was, but they take that tour with all the photos of the different Miss Juneteenths over the years. And obviously there's Turquoise's picture, and she doesn't have any of the accomplishments that the other Miss Juneteenth winners do. And it's just a very interesting way of presenting sort of these conflicts between how to be a lady, how to be a Texas lady, or what exactly constitutes the proper way for women to carry themselves. And women are shown as I'll stop talking now, but just that basic idea of like how to carry yourself within this society, that I thought was really interesting.
There's also the idea in this film that women are multidimensional, which seems so obvious, but in so many stories we just see like, oh, that's a single mom and that's all that she is a single mom. And then in this film, there's so much more. She's got so many layers and so much going on that it's not just, oh, that's a woman who's working 2 jobs to support her daughter. There's so much more to unfold there. So I really appreciated that too. And likely that's because it was a woman creator too. But it was really refreshing, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, anytime I can see Black people being presented, because I've not in everything would I agree with certain things that Denzel Washington said, but there is one particular thing about not necessarily needing to blacken up. Just the very existence of a black person in a role will bring all the things you need as far as it pertains to its blackness. And I just felt as though the more women you get to see, because it's not just the dynamics and the layers that Jasmine is talking about, which are wonderful to see in a main character, but then you get to bounce that or echo it off of all these other different types of women that exist in the movie, and then that even the echo that comes back just even adds more layers of who she is as compared to who her daughter is, as compared to who her mother is, as compared to who other women that work in the neighborhood are, her co-worker even, and their different views on the same things, and also where their views are similar on a lot of things. And the more of that you get to see, I just think, again, it gives you more of a perspective. There's aspects of this, again, because we've seen it from the male perspective, but just that become almost instantaneously refreshing just off the fact that you're seeing it now from a woman's perspective, like some of the things you saw in maybe something like A Raisin in the Sun, between the mother and the son and everything stuff and these past generations. So watching that go between her and then seeing, as Israel pointed out, the Juneteenth and even some of the things, the ways in which always it seems like are passing through, and the things that a lot of us come up with as to how to better ourselves are so borrowed from ideas that the structures around us have already formed, so that the Juneteenth women, they have like the etiquette class, and these are all things that are based in a Western idea of like class and self-betterment and all these other things. But ultimately, I think to have not only her, but to present the town in itself and all these people that hinge their hopes on things like this, and ultimately they end up in the same place where, again, disproving things like meritocracy and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So I want to ask you guys a little bit more about the directing choices. Eliana asked, or is wondering, how does Channing's directing choices inform not just the emotional impact of the story, but what it says about her potential career? This is kind of her. I think it's the first thing that I've heard of her doing.
Yeah, it's her debut.
What do you think? Sorry, go ahead.
I'll say this is her debut.
Yeah,
for a feature.
For a feature, but I haven't heard of her in terms of shorts or like this is the first thing that I've ever been exposed to her of her career. So I was just wondering, what do you think about the choices that she made, how she put this film together, and what that kind of could signify for moving on?
She has a style. She definitely she has a very. I'm very interested in her style as a writer going forward, because she has a really good sense of character and how to bring in a lot of different types of characters and mold them into a good quality story. And this kind of movie reminds me of some of Ava's early movies and stuff from Barry when he was doing like this, and for Melancholy, and so I do think over time it'll hopefully she gets more money, she gets more opportunity, and I can definitely see her really making engaging stories. And I think her writing is really what will separate her the most, personally.
And speaking of the writing, I would actually be very curious to read the script, because it almost seems like, as a director, she kind of let the actors embody the characters the way they wanted to. And that I just mean that it didn't feel like anybody was overacting. It didn't feel like anything was too forced. It all felt very natural. And as an actor, a lot of times that comes from when you do get the creativity to kind of make the character your own instead of the director or the writer saying, no, the character has to be exactly like this. No, you have to do it exactly that way. This felt a lot more fluid and a lot more relaxed. And because of that, it felt more real and more natural. So I would be extremely curious to kind of read what was on the text versus what the actors brought to life.
Yeah, and basically right along with that, with what Jasmine said, that was one of the things that I put down, that it felt to me like she was an actor's kind of director. I feel like I can always notice, or I feel like I can in films. I feel like she had a style that, it's going to seem weird considering his political stances and stuff, but still, Clint Eastwood has a very straightforward style to me in his directing. There's not a lot of frills. There's not a lot of, extreme angles or close-ups or anything like that. He mostly kind of just lets his actors work within the script and the framework that he has. And then also feeling like we've seen two movies so far to me with underappreciated actors, and then what happens when they get in with the director that is, well, black, number one, and also under really is willing to, I think, let them play within the framework, and that's Delroy Lindo and Spike Lee's The Five Bloods. And then now Nicole Bahari. These are two underrated, I feel as though, actors that as long as they were working within the system, then they had trouble. The minute they get these roles that I think allow them to play, allow them to have something to sink their teeth into, then all of a sudden we get to see the full range of the skills that they have. And that really, really stood out to me along with other actors, so that it feels ultimately like, along with Clint Eastwood, along with maybe Quentin Tarantino, that this is the type of the director that in future we will see is able to get really good performances out of people that you might not even if not, that's not who I think of with Nicole Bahari, but still, even with people that I don't know necessarily have like a whole lot of training, I think she seems like the type of director to be able to get good performances out of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was excited about this movie because of Nicole Bahari, because of I think it's been kind of pretty well documented, like her treatment in this industry versus the talent that she so clearly has. But I do think that there's something about and I'm thinking about, our host who put this all together, Eliana, like the directors that have to write to make the films that they want, they have to start, creating and doing it more holistically and stretching those muscles. You know what I mean? If you want to direct, if you want the opportunity to direct something truthful and good, and you're a Black woman, it seems like right now the best way to do that is to write it yourself. Like, just like do it all yourself. So I think that is something that I'm excited to see what she could do with given a chance in a more traditional studio space and a bigger budget. But I do also think that like what you were saying, David, the actors, director, and really kind of leaning into letting these actors really embody and be creative and showcasing that, and not having that much. I mean, this could have been a play, it was very much driven by performances. And I think that is exciting. Those are the kind of films that I personally love. I want to move on though, because we have one more movie that we want to talk about. And so we go from a female writer and director who did both to Cooley High. Also, I can't do math, but Miss Juneteenth in 2020 and Cooley High set in 1975. Written by Michael Schultz and directed by Eric Monte. This was one of the first like films that I saw in like film school that was like a Black film that we talked about, not that in my school that I talked about outside of Black film. You know, I saw it in like and not in my Black cinema class, but in a different context, and so it stuck with me for that reason. But I'm just wondering what your kind of thoughts are about Cooley High, and have you seen it before? How long has it been since you've seen it, and what stood out to you revisiting this?
I've seen Cooley High probably several. I mean, around like 7 or 8 times. I really do enjoy that film. I think along with what you said, I also think it was one of those films. I didn't see it in film school. My film school was super white, all the material that we were being introduced to. But it was one of those films that when I first saw it, it was kind of, I think it was one, along with a few other films, one of the films that really pushed me to want to make sure that I was in my work and in my writing pushing up Black films, and even Black films that I don't think necessarily feature the same sort of aesthetics that normally get praised by Black directors that allow you an entree into the industry as, you know, kind of an accepted peer. So this was just one that just felt like, to me, like it was again, just like Miss Juneteenth. I don't really look at it as kind of like this Friels directing, this very ornate type of direction. It just was very tight. It was well scripted, allowed the actors to sort of play and find their own way, and I just thought it was real. As a kind of consequence, it's always been very truthful to me, no matter even the era, as to how still a lot of things change, but then certain things just don't, about growing up in areas like this and how you try to find joy in the spaces that you can, and so on and so forth.
This was my first time watching the film, so that was kind of a heavy whoa for me. But interestingly enough, in film school, we talked about Black films, but usually it was in the context of like Blaxploitation or that kind of thing, which seems like this would have come out kind of in the height of all that too, which is really interesting to me, because this being such a film that's like a day in the life of these teenagers versus the extremes of what Blaxploitation is, and those films having such characters that don't seem real and you can't really relate to. This was so relatable and did seem real, and was like, yeah, that could be any teen in Chicago back then, you know. So I thought that was a really interesting shift from other Black films that were coming out back then. So yeah, for a first time watch for me, that was it was a roller coaster, but I enjoyed it.
It was definitely my first time in years watching it. I don't think I watched it since I was a kid. Funny enough, it was one of those movies made in the midst of Blaxploitation by people who felt like Blaxploitation movies weren't accurately depicting what Black life was like, which, you know, that's not an argument I want to get into today. But one thing that's cool to me about Cooley High, and probably why I probably gravitate to movies of the 70s the most, is they are very committed to depicting a time, a specific place, and they're very in tune to the times that they're in. You know, it was there's no social media in the 70s, so things could just move slowly, and like how things were the year before is still how they likely are a year later. And so when you make a movie about being a high school kid in the 70s in Chicago, it's gonna resonate even in a way that like movies can't really do now, because you make a movie about high school now, every reference you make will be old by the time it comes out. So, and it's I guess the most notable thing is just how much it hasn't aged in a sense that like kids are kids no matter what, no matter what generation they're part of, and this sense of hopelessness, but also of maybe ambition because you're young and you have to have that kind of ambition when you're young, and there's this like pull of like, can I escape this environment that I'm in versus or this fear that like I'm just probably gonna be here for the rest of my life and I'm gonna lose my friends and I'm gonna just be stuck on the streets. And they do it in a very un unexploitative way. They do it in a very just like these kids are kids and they're relatable to anyone who would watch. But they also are not trying to paint blackness as this like special thing that you have to prove to white people that is worthy or something. They're just presented as people, and it's a funny movie. It's a lot of fun to watch until the end, but I was just pleasantly surprised by how much fun it still is.
Yeah, I mean, Cooley High is my dad's favorite movie, and the first time I ever saw it, my dad showed it to me, and he was, a teenager. He was like the target demographic when it came out. He was a kid from LA though, and so I always really loved it. And still to this day when I watch it, I think about like what my dad and his friends were doing in 1975. They weren't graduating high school, but they were in the middle of their high school career, and thinking about how great I think the Cooley High does of balancing being kids and making dumb mistakes and feeling invincible, and also the other hand of being Black kids, and you can't really afford to make dumb mistakes, right? Like you're not allowed to go joyriding. You're not allowed to just kind of fall into these impulsive decisions and be okay at the end of it, and so it kind of it balances, I think, that like useful joy and invincible spirit of being a teenager with the realities of consequences that come down on just by being Black. But it also utilizes Chicago in such a really great way. Like my dad grew up a kid in the 70s in LA. So the fact that still resonates with him, while Chicago is such a big, I think, it's another major character in the story, I think is really cool as well. Do you guys have any thoughts on what it says, like what the movie says, and how it's how it's changed or how it hasn't changed? Just being a teenager, a teenage boy in America in a big city.
So one thing about it is, and I guess we should point out that even though it's like the movie came out in 1975, it's not based in the 70s. It's based in the 60s during the Motown era, I think 60s or 50s. But so I didn't want anyone who was probably trying to correct us. Like, all right, I wanted to make sure we got it. It's definitely what's interesting to me is a lot of the movies that would follow its blueprint came out in the 80s, like maybe a decade later with like Crush Groove and Wild Style and like movies about New York and hip hop. But they all kind of follow the Cooley High map of like what it's like to be a young Black male in the inner city. And the depiction, except for a couple of changes, it's still roughly the same, and uh, it's definitely a fascinating fascinating way to grapple with just how expendable your life can seem when you're young and black, and how that almost creates this like more recklessness, but also like a fear of that extra recklessness. Because like on one hand, it's like, why don't you just, if you're gonna go out in the blaze of glory, but then you still have that human fear of just not wanting to fall through the cracks. Then when you watch Preach kind of lose it and get kind of lose control and like forget what he wants to do with himself and get caught up in like hanging out with his friends and just fucking around. It definitely it's an understandable thing, and it's good that we have the language of mental health now for young people. But at a time when we did, it was definitely interesting the ways that it would come out, because it always comes out in some way.
I think that it was really interesting that it showed in life when you're an adolescent like that how fine the line is that you're balancing on when you're looking at your future. Because, right before the credits, we see kind of the Where Are They Now sequences, and it's really telling how that could have been any of them. So, like, one student becomes a librarian and has a family, but the other two students end up dying because of, like a robber. You know what I mean? So it's like those little choices in life that you make, while they seem so small, can have the greatest impact on your future. So, and it's hard because as a kid, you don't really know or care about that stuff. But every little thing that you do really can lead you in one direction or another. I think that was what was really kind of poignant and beautiful about that film.
Yeah, I would agree. I felt as though there are two things that kind of hit me right offhand that go along in that sort of same spectrum of this sort of map of decisions, but also in the ways, the kind of sort of tragic ways where, again, it could sort of totally flies in the face of things like meritocracy and things of that nature, where a black teacher is calling himself trying to aid these students out, but his very action is what causes one of them to die in this sort of domino effect of events that really couldn't be helped by anyone except for, again, just kind of being in America and being in the position that all of us are kind of scrounged into. And then I just think like cultural things, stuck out with me from then to now. A lot of the behavior with these young men, as it was with women, was very interesting to watch because a lot of it is like kind of super rapey, and yet at the same time, you're obviously looking at it from the perspective of when the time that it came out. But it'd be like I said again, talking about moving it in and what it would be different in this day and age is obviously. I wonder. Obviously, I think on screen it might be different, but how much of that has changed in the school systems? How much of that changed as far as like high school kids growing up in the kind of handsiness, especially as it pertains to young black men growing up, especially with all the things that we know that goes on with young black women in the inner cities and things of that nature. So yeah, those were like the two things as far as like culturally that kind of like stood out with me in the movie, or something I was paying attention to as I was watching it.
Yeah, Portia in the comics brings up a good point that I think we should talk about too, and just juxtaposing these two movies, And so, she's interested to hear your opinions about how women are portrayed in Cooley High versus Miss Juneteenth. She, like you do, at the cringe moment when it comes to Cooley High, and there are a few in which I'm just like, wow, wow. But was that it was definitely more acceptable at the time period. Not that it was good or ever right, but it was definitely more of a. I don't think it would have been that controversial to a lot of people to see when that movie came out. So, do you guys have any ideas or any opinions on the differences in how the women are portrayed? We talked a lot about women in Miss Juneteenth, but the women in Cooley High as well.
I mean, it probably doesn't pass the Bechdel test. I didn't specifically pay attention to that, but I'm guessing it did not. Because, the women were really seen as, let's go drink and party and get some girls, right? Like, they were all just seen as objects. Like, I don't think there was any conversation. I guess somewhat when they're sitting on the bed reading poetry, he kind of realized she had a brain. But other than that, it's pretty one-dimensional. And yeah, Rich is right. It was kind of cringy. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
No, it's all right. Go ahead, Razor.
No, go ahead. It's fine.
Yeah, and that same thing. There were a lot of down in the stairs when both Cochise and Preach were each with girls, and Cochise is at least his girls at least a little bit more giving in as far as like some version of consent, but then the girl that Preach is dealing with is just, you felt bad for her. And it's, and a lot of it to me with a difference.
Not want to be there.
Yeah, exactly. Clearly. And like in the perspective of the film, a lot of it was that I could tell that it's almost being played. Some of these instances were being played for their supposed humor in them. And so then you're watching it and going, oh, I can tell this is supposed to be funny, but there ain't shit funny about it. And so it's just that is a huge difference, as I think. And then you kind of move to Miss Juneteenth, where there is a mother, clearly trying to protect her daughter through respectability politics from this kind of behavior. And that's about the only thing I could really connect these two, because the depictions are so vastly different as to what it's like for a young woman. And then outside of, again, if I think it was focused on sex in that sort of way, that I think that this film, and I think if it was focusing on that aspect, then I think there might be some places where it might cross over, but outside of that, there just wasn't much. And I think, again, it's indicative of both generationally what's going on, and then also the fact that it's being told from a male perspective rather than a female's perspective. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that the other thing about it is, Cooley High is working from not just a male perspective, but a young male perspective, a very young male perspective, and it functions the way boys are socialized to function, unfortunately. So just a lot of like partying and sports and women as these things to assist in accomplishment for them, as in order to prove some sort of manhood to themselves, really. Whereas, Juneteenth is obviously it's a movie from an adult woman's perspective, and just the men in it are either unreliable or they can be, caretakers, but caretakers in very specific ways. Even the nice guy in Miss Juneteenth, he views himself as a better option because of the life that he's promising to give her. as opposed to anything having to do with, what kind of person he can be for her, or what kind of, just, like the viewpoints are very different in because of how the age and also the masculine versus a more feminine viewpoint. And obviously that's not apologize for anything. This Cooley High was a very problematic movie, but it's like it wouldn't most of that stuff wouldn't be tolerated, and if you made it now, and it probably shouldn't have been tolerated then, but it's also
it's not a
sort of endemic of how
excuse.
far we've had to come.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to comparing both films in terms of how they use their location and their setting. Like we talked about, Miss Juneteenth is very, you can feel Texas in it, and you can feel, it's just like I can see Beyonce Knowles Carter down the way, also practicing for her Miss Juneteenth debut, with the way that is shot and seen. And then, of course, with Cooley High, you can really see. To me, I felt like Chicago was another main character. Seeing them hopping on trains, and even what happens, like where Cochise ends his story, it just felt very much like Chicago was woven all through that, and you could not pick Cooley High up and place it in another setting without losing something. So I was wondering what you guys thought about those.
You go ahead if you like.
No, actually, I'd actually wait because I actually have to fill my point out a little bit more.
Yeah, the city, the places they're shot at definitely influence the films, and they definitely try to match the mood of those locations with their film. Miss Juneteenth, it's like it's very slow. Not very, but it's slow. It's very the look is very sweaty and glazed and hot. You can feel the heat off coming up the screen. And Cooley High is fast. It's dirty. It's just like the city. It's grimy, and it's has the rambunctiousness that you feel when you live in a big city or big downtown area. And both movies are better for capturing that energy of their locations.
It's always interesting to me to see how a lot of times in films that are set in more rural places, and in a lot of ways, especially let's say opportunity wise, they can be even more closed down than a city. But then at the same time, how a city aesthetically, at least to me, feels a lot more open than than the country or anywhere near it. But it's in like the ways in which one is more like the other is kind of opposites. And so it's like the city aesthetically feels trapped in what's the name, but it feels like what's his name saying, "I'm getting out of here." You completely understand it because it feels very boxed in. Whereas even the land, for as huge as the city was, it always felt like there wasn't many places to go in Cooley High. And then in Miss Juneteenth, you feel it in a, at least I felt it in a different sort of way, that there weren't many options for a lot of people, but as far as the land, it felt a lot more open, and so like the just that juxtaposition is just something the only thing I really noted off of it.
I would argue that in Miss Juneteenth, her lack of options wasn't necessarily because of the location, because Fort Worth is a metro hub. I mean, it's DFW, so there is a lot of stuff there. It is a city in itself, but the film itself was showing kind of the outskirts or the more suburbia of it, which I think showed a reflection of Turquoise's life. And I think Israel said, like, kind of slowing down and just seeing the smaller parts of what that is. So I don't think it's necessarily that she couldn't have gone to the city and had that same kind of life. I think she made a conscious decision to say, oh, I'm going to stay here and do this kind of slower thing and raise my child over here.
Yeah, no,
I was thinking a lot about access, and this is something that as a kid. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, David.
Oh no, just to say that basically, I would totally agree with that. I mean, my thing was more just acknowledging that there's this feeling that you get off of things that is an opposite of the reality, but that for me, and again, I think also you got to consider your own biases as to which one you came from. But that, like I said, just in seeing the countryside, often it feels to me like it's more open. But then a lot of times the story is always about the lack of opportunities there and how that's vice versa in the cities. That's all.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about the access. And this is someone that grew up in California, in the suburbs of a big city. But in Cooley High, they were able to, they have like public transportation that can get them anywhere. And so they're able to move around a lot more. Where in both Miss Juneteenth and Cooley High, Preacher's mom says that she works 3 jobs, right? And then Miss Juneteenth, she's working a lot. The mother is working a lot too. But Kai is waiting. She's got to get picked up. She's got to, go somewhere else. She doesn't have she can't hop on a train or have her friends pick her up and, steal a car and go on a joyride. I mean, they could probably do the joyride thing now in Texas. I don't think that's cut off from them. But just the sense of like freedom of movement for kids and teenagers waiting to be, picked up from school, or she tells her mom, like, I could walk, or I don't need, like, why are you picking me up in a hearse, and just having that kind of sense of in a city, especially a city like Chicago, where they're just expected to get themselves to school from school, and the level of access that opens up to for them to get in trouble or to do certain things. And I feel like that wasn't available to Kai and Miss Juneteenth. But that shook me in terms of the difference in location and the difference in the regions. So we're like coming up on time soon, but I just want to, any like final thoughts about these movies, what you'll take away from them, what you loved and didn't love. Anyone?
I'll go first then. Being an actor myself, always I end up focusing on performances. And with Miss Juneteenth, I really was hyper focused on Nicole Beharie, and I wasn't like, of course, there's always that chance for that to happen, but I don't think I was going into it with that, and yet it's the main thing I came away with. I just even more so than Cooley High, which was more like an ensemble type of deal. Even though I always really liked Glenn Turman, and then that leads me to the next aspect, which is, once again, every time I watch movies like that and I see, I get saddened a lot of times, especially from other years, because I watch time and time again, you see performers that in another time, in another place where this shit isn't going on, excuse me, you would see them have full-blooded and full-bodied careers, and that doesn't happen. And so Glenn Turman just kind of disappears. You'll see him sporadically throughout his career in these minor parts that continued to be great, but never just really like picked up. And then you see Nicole Bahari, and then you get this difficult tag. And just one minor note was that in Eddie Murphy's career, when I was doing research on him for a piece one time, I remember reading all the different reviews on his film post, the first three or four, and everyone constantly references his ego and constantly calling him difficult and suggesting that that these movies are purely being made like The Golden Child, like Boomerang, off of the size of his ego, and he's getting too big for his britches in the industry. And then you hear this difficulty tag being put on Nicole Bahari, and it's just like, man, how little things change over time, and that always distresses me. But at the same time, I'm always happy to just watch Black performers bud and flower and bloom right before your eyes in front of the camera.
I just enjoy these movies as a showcase for independent filmmaking, but also, Nicole Bahari is a presence, and she really carries Miss Juneteenth, and she does a great job in it. And I'm definitely interested to see what she does next, and I'm positive that she will make the best out of her career, and that she deserves as many chances as she can as they give her. But which I hope is a lot, obviously, because she's just a really good actress. And like Eliana said in the comments, shout out to Eric Monte, and the writer of Cooley High, and who went on to do work with Good Times and the Jeffersons and all the early Black television shows. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun too. Especially because, like I said, both of those were brand new to me. So it was nice. I'll be curious to go back and watch them a second time and see, kind of knowing what I know at the end, viewing it again. Because there were some other little things that I picked up, but probably couldn't quite put together what they meant quite yet. Like in Miss Juneteenth, the way they used the color yellow stuck out to me a lot, but I couldn't really quite place a theme to it yet. So I might go back and rewatch specifically with that in mind. But they were both really great. I had a lot of fun with both of them and discussing this. Oh, and we didn't talk about, but the soundtrack for Cooley High, top tier. I am listening to that at work on Monday. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Cooley High is really well known for the music and the way that they use music. I think that, my takeaway from both of these movies is kind of, they're both telling very specific stories, but in that it highlights how universal, how relatable the Black experience is, and how like I think David said, like, things haven't changed that much, in both a positive and negative way, so there's still something to be said about community and finding that and being able to like really rely on people and really feel like you have a place in the world. But then there's also the flip side of that, of being kind of denied opportunities, denied being able to really like reach your full potential for things that are outside of your control. And you see that in both of these films, and in the stories of both of or in the stories of people involved in both of these films, actors, directors, writers, all of this talent, just an overwhelming amount of talent. And I'm interested to see how much of that is able to come to fruition and how much potential, comes from that. So thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for talking about your experiences with the films. Let us know where we can find you, and where people can, follow and keep up with what you're doing. Israel, you want to start?
You can find me on Twitter, I guess, sometimes. It's at Israel, which is my name, and Izreal. You can also follow my blog or newsletter, which is attached to my profile on Twitter. Really, anything you want to find on me is attached on my profile on Twitter, honestly. But yeah, I'm writing around wherever I can get work. So.
Yeah, so you can find me basically Jamel Pale is my Twitter tag. At Black Inform is my IG. That's BLACK N as in no, FORM as in mother. And basically, those are two places I have my blog site, which is departuresblog.com. And that's where most of my work is associated. As a result, wherever I can get work is usually where I post my other writings.
And you can find me on Twitter at JazzJanae, JASJANAE. It's my first name, middle name. And you can find me talking about anything, but I do like to live tweet shows and movies, so catch me there. Thanks for this.
And a lot of 1D love too, which I love.
Yes. A lot of boy band stuff too.
Great. And I'm Robin. You can find me at Black Girls Create. Thanks again to all of you guys for joining us and talking about these movies with us. Thanks to Sunshine Moxie. And we'll continue with our Juneteenth Cinema Celebration. We have more coming up tomorrow. And follow us at Black Girls Create, BLK Girls Create, or at Sunshine Moxie, and keep up with what we're doing. Tomorrow we'll be watching Daughters of the Dust and Lemonade. Very excited about that. And we'll have another panel after we screen both of those. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your Juneteenth.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.